Jeremy Yorgason was a sophomore at BYU, living with a former mission companion, when his parents paid him a visit.
Like, Grandpa's having a hard time. Maybe you could move in with him and be his roommate. And I said, well, sure, I'll think about that, So I went and visited my grandpa, and he says, your parents tell me that you're moving in with me. And so it's kind of already a done deal. I just didn't know. But I moved in with Grandpa and lived with him for several months. We became good friends, and it really was a special bonding time. There were some health needs that he had that I had a chance to help with, and those were really meaningful.
As you might expect, his grandpa took the opportunity to impart some wisdom to this young whippersnapper.
Almost every day, my grandpa would invite me into the living room and say, there's something I've been wanting to talk with you about. There's something that was on his mind. Uh-huh. And I did not know if that was a 15-minute conversation or a 2-hour conversation.
But the living situation was not without its perils.
My grandpa didn't want to waste anything. And so when he was done with a meal, he would put whatever was left over in the freezer in a Tupperware or something like that. And then at some point, he would decide it was time to eat the leftovers, and he would take out the Tupperwares and put everything into the blender, and he would just mix it all together.
Oh!
He called it his secret combination stew.
Welcome to the Why Magazine podcast, bringing you ideas, stories, and voices from Brigham Young University. I'm Whitney Archibald, and today we're talking with Jeremy Yorgason, a BYU grad who's now teaching at BYU in the Department of Family Life. Little did he know when he was that college student living with his grandpa that he'd end up specializing in later life family relationships. Today he's going to talk to us about aging care, specifically how to initiate difficult conversations, including when it's time to take away those car keys, and about both the blessing and the burden of caregiving. Yorgason's field of study is especially important these days.
We have the baby boom generation, and so for a period of about 12 or 13 years, you have 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. So if that gives you an idea, there are millions, tens of millions of baby boomers.
Caring for such a large aging population will affect most of us in one way or another, whether we're in this stage of life ourselves, related to someone who is, or directly caring for someone who is. Part of the challenge when we're starting to talk to our loved ones about aging care is that there are so many unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen to them or when they're going to need extra care. I asked Jeremy about this. How do you start to have these conversations when you don't even know what the conversation is really about yet?
You're right. There's so much unknown. But what I think what we can talk about is end-of-life care. The risk is that if you don't talk about it, your aging family member may not receive the care that they actually would want in their later years. And logistics and emergencies will drive the care that's given and received rather than what they would want or what they'd be most happy with.
Right. And sometimes in those situations, if it's an emergency, they might not have a voice.
Yeah, exactly. Or if dementia develops and they can't vocalize what they'd want. Now, there's a lot of ups and downs. They might say, well, I want this or I want that, but you can hearken back to the conversations you've had. Well, a few years ago, you expressed this desire. Is that still what you want? A lot of times, older adults are thinking about this, and they also have friends and neighbors, and they see what kind of care people receive. And so you can also say, hey, do you have any friends who are receiving the kind of care in their later years that you would want? Or do you have any that you would not want? So that can also be a way to start the conversation, is just talk about their friends and the people that they know.
Yeah, I like that. Why do you think these conversations are so awkward to initiate?
Well, I think younger generations worry that they're sending a message that they want their older family members to die.
Oh, yeah.
and maybe older family members might think that's what they're thinking. But I think you can be just clear, say, you know what, I love you, I care about you, and I want you to receive the best care possible. But people have different preferences.
Right.
I don't want to assume that what you want is what I think you want.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. When should these conversations start?
If you have aging family members, now is a good time to have a conversation with them. If you're a grandchild, you can talk to your parents about your grandparents. If you have aging parents yourself, you can talk to your parents, and you also can talk to your children and start the conversation with them and say, I've been thinking about what kind of care I would want in my later years, and I would love to talk with you about that so that you know. And starting the conversation, really, it should be ongoing, and it can change as things change. And so it's good to start it and to just keep having that conversation and touching base on it on occasion.
So what are some of the obstacles that you have seen for making some of these decisions?
Sometimes what an aging family member wants is not safe for them.
Mm.
So let's say they want to stay in their home, and that often is the best choice. However, if they have 24-hour needs, it may not be possible for the people living with them or not living with them to provide that care that they need. And a lot of times it becomes really clear when this is a situation where, let's say, somebody is falling a lot, or they're not having the nutritional needs met that they have, or maybe you start to see less cleaning up as someone's not able to do the things that they need to live comfortably. So, yeah, we watch for these signs, but we want to balance. We want to let the older family member, the older person, have their preferences as long as they're safe, as long as their needs are met. But we might have to make decisions against an older family member's wishes.
Right.
And we have to assure them that we care about them. And it may not sit well with them, honestly, sometimes, but when we're acting in their best interest, over time, hopefully they'll agree. And I mean, sometimes this happens with driving. Okay.
I was just thinking about that with my own grandfather. That was a struggle to get him to stop driving when he only had one functional eye and was getting in multiple accidents, but he was not going to give up those keys.
And that's where you go to the medical community and you talk with them about, could you please have a conversation with my aging family member about their driving? But the medical field is really good at this, and they do it a lot. So sometimes you do have to say, I know you feel comfortable driving and you want to do that, but I don't feel comfortable. I'm worried, and so I'm not going to ride with you.
Yeah. When you're getting older, it's hard to come to terms with that and realize when you're becoming less capable. And it's hard to admit to that, and hard to let go of your independence. So there's a lot of emotion wrapped up into it when it comes down to it.
There is. One place where everybody's on the same page usually is safety and the safety of others. We wouldn't want anybody to get hurt. And a lot of times that resonates with older adults, and they're willing to make changes so that they don't hurt anybody accidentally.
Well, and I like the idea of, having a plan of, maybe several plans, really, because since we don't know what's going to, how our health is going to be, what our mental capacity is going to be, just having a couple of branches, a couple of ideas of what might happen, and expressing your wishes in each of those eventualities.
Yeah, that sounds ideal.
Right. But then you have human nature involved, and it's not quite so logical, right?
There's kind of two pathways that families take into providing and receiving care in later years. And one of those pathways is a plan ahead, look at options, shop around, see what the person's preferences are, identify the resources available. Care in later years is not inexpensive. It's very expensive. And so that is one way that many families work with their older family members to provide the care that they need. But the other model that many families use is the emergency model, where, you know what, mom or dad doesn't want to leave their home. We're just going to wait until they can't be there anymore. And then an emergency happens, and then they look and see what's available. I don't necessarily think one of these is best. Okay. I prefer the plan ahead model, but for some families, they just want to wait it out. And sometimes that emergency is, a stroke or a fall or a heart attack or something like that. And other times the care needed is more gradual, and there are lots of mini emergencies
right.
that drive changes. So
I like that perspective that neither one is wrong. What are some of the creative solutions you've seen as you've been researching elder care?
I would say the most creative situations I've seen involve a network of care. And I probably have a bias here as well, but I think that's a good way to go. And so spouses oftentimes do not consider themselves as caregivers. They think of themselves as, I'm a spouse, and so I provide care to this person that I love and that I've loved for years and years. And I basically give my life for them. And so you have caregivers, sometimes spouses, that feel like they have to do everything, or they're a bad spouse or not a good partner, something like that. But actually, the creative, I think, good case scenarios are, I'm going to involve friends of my family member. I'm going to involve neighbors, maybe members of a church community, definitely resources in the community. We have a lot of resources like caregiver support groups. We have our local area agency on aging that often provides services such as Meals on Wheels. And sometimes we bring in home care or hospice. And so when there is a network of care, even siblings, I haven't mentioned all of them, but right. This is where someone could get creative themselves and say, okay, I'm going to bring in every possible person that I can to be involved in this person's life. And now the caregiving is not so burdensome.
Yeah, and that can include peers, right? Like just making sure that they have a social network and someone to chat with or play cards with.
Yeah, just little things here and there can make a big difference. The primary caregiver is often, they're the caregiver at night. They're the caregiver in the morning. They're, throughout the day. There's a book called The 36-Hour Day. Mm. It is the manual for caring for someone with dementia.
Okay.
And it's a really great resource. But even just the title of that book suggests that when you're caring for someone with dementia, you are working hard. You're working a lot.
Yeah.
And so just involving as many resources and people as you can is a great way to go. As caregivers, we have a chance to help someone oftentimes with things that are private or that they really don't want help with, but they need help with. And those can be special moments. So caregiving is an angelic and special time. At the same time, the research focuses a lot on caregiver burden and the stress that caregivers take on. And so caregiving is work, emotional and physical. And because of that, it's okay to bring in other people to help out. A caregiver that's alive and healthy is a much better caregiver than one that is so stressed and so tired and not able to really take care of themselves because of the care they're providing. So finding some balance, I know it's hard, as much as possible is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. I'd love to talk about goals and how to get your goals aligned, because I know that sometimes maybe the caregiver's goals might not be the same as the person you're taking care of. How do you make sure that you know what they're looking for and what you're looking for and help sync those up?
I go back to this principle that if the person who's receiving care, if their wishes do not harm them, then we try and go with theirs. However, if the kind of care they want or when they want it actually puts them in harm's way or doesn't fill in the gaps of the care that they need, then sometimes we have to do something different from what they want.
Right.
And so for example, let's say somebody has a health emergency, goes into the hospital, and they need care that can't be provided at home. They may go to a rehabilitation center. They may go into long-term care. And it's common for people in long-term care to not want to be there. Who wants to live somewhere that's not their home and they're around people that are not their family and they're not eating the foods that they're used to? It's just not as comfortable. And so I remember having a conversation with my dad when he was being cared for, and he says, I just want to go home. And I said, well, you know that mom can't take care of you in the nighttime. That's why you're here. And It was through this conversation that he realized, oh, I didn't realize that I actually needed help from somebody else. I thought I could just take care of myself. And we just had to have sometimes some hard conversations.
Yeah, like that's a tricky thing, the whole self-awareness factor. What is a way that you can gently bring about that self-awareness when they're not quite seeing the severity or the danger?
I mentioned this conversation I had with my dad. I could say, well, how many times were you up in the night last night? How many times did somebody help you last night? He might remember last night or the night before.
Right.
Or a few nights ago. Like, are you getting help in the night? And do you remember that you fell and had to go to the hospital and get stitches, that someone had to help you? And it probably was something like that that helped him to realize, oh, yeah, my mom did provide a lot of care in the nighttime, and it was really hard.
Yeah. You touched a little bit about some of the blessings of caregiving and some of the meaningful interactions you have. Do you have any suggestions for making this a really meaningful part of your relationship?
Well, a lot of times what we focus on is what we experience. And our attitude can influence a lot of things. And I think if caregivers were to be thinking, okay, how can I have a positive, happy connection with this person today? And actually, we do this with children all the time.
Right.
We're thinking, okay, how can I help my child? How can I help them to feel my love, my support? How can I feel connected with them? And we could think that same way with our aging family members. Okay, how can I make this a special day for them, or have one positive interaction today that's meaningful, that's uplifting? And so I just think going into this, caregiving is a hard job, and there can be a lot of stress involved. And if we're just focusing on that, it could be miserable. But if we were to focus on the good, we might be able to actually have more good or have a better experience in the caregiving journey.
Yeah, I think that's true for sure. I mean, these are sometimes our last moments with these beloved people, and to get it bogged down in logistics or physical safety without exploring that element of connection and meaning can be a really lost opportunity. What are some of the areas that you've researched in this realm of senior care, and what are some of the surprising or interesting findings that you've seen?
Most of my research has been in spousal caregiving. How does one spouse provide care for another? How does illness and the challenges that come with it affect the marriage relationship? One of the surprising findings that I found multiple times in my research is that sometimes on a more stressful health day, it actually is correlated with more positive marital interactions. And so the caregiving actually becomes a benefit to the marriage. And I just have found this in times when I didn't anticipate it. We were looking at persons with cancer and their spouse, and persons with dementia and their spouse. When a caregiver reported higher caregiver burden, if their spouse has dementia, then their marital quality went down. However, if their spouse had cancer, the positive aspects of marital quality did not go down.
Interesting. Okay.
My interpretation of that is that in some situations, knowing that your time with a spouse is limited and having them there cognitively can bring greater closeness.
Right.
However, in some situations, when the partner is not really the person they used to be, and they're not there, as the stress and demands of care go up, it's harder.
That's interesting. And it rings true for me because I never saw my grandparents happier and less argumentative with each other, shall I say, than when my grandpa was in the hospital toward the end. He was just so sweet with her and she was so sweet with him. I could tell that they were, savoring those moments. There were always some quarreling when we were all together, and we all noticed that big change toward the end where they were just like, oh, I won't have this forever. And you could see that marital quality going up right before our eyes. So that definitely rings true for me.
From a spiritual perspective, sometimes marital quality improves after someone passes away, after one of the spouses passes away. Well, because the caregiving and the irritations of health challenges really can increase conflict in marriage. And sometimes with a little bit of time, people start to remember how it used to be before they faced those challenges. They believe their spouse is on the other side and they'll get to see them soon, and they look forward to that. And know that they're going to meet up in a better place physically, maybe emotionally as well.
Yeah. On a spiritual level, what are some of the blessings that come from this caregiving relationship?
When we face trials in life, we often turn to our Heavenly Father and our Savior for help. Things are out of our control. We can't do anything about them. And so we turn to our Heavenly Father, to a higher power, and we ask for help. And we ask for comfort, for peace. We would love to be relieved of these challenges, and we know sometimes that they're part of mortality. In Alma 33, verse 11, Alma was referring back to Zenos and when he prayed, and he says in verse 11, "And thou didst hear me because of mine afflictions and my sincerity." And I think the Lord knows when we're having a hard time, and I think He does hear us in our afflictions. And so in the challenges that we face with aging, our aging bodies, I tell my students that whatever health challenges we get in later life are kind of like a mission call. We don't know where they're going to be to. We may have some idea from our family history what challenges we might be more likely to face, but we really don't know what we're going to face. I believe our Heavenly Father knows that this is hard, and He is attentive to our needs when we turn to Him.
Thank you for listening to the Y Magazine podcast. This episode is based on an article in the winter 2024 issue, Prepare to Care by Tyler Staley. You may also enjoy another recent episode about difficult conversations, Disagree Without Disaster, How to Talk Politics with Family. And you should also check out Making Peace, How to Mediate Conflict in Our Families. This episode of the Y Magazine podcast was produced by me, Whitney Archibald, with executive producer Emma Collier, with editing by Olivia Flynn. Original music mixing and mastering by Jarrett Davis.